what is a moment that you've experienced where you've known, like, I feel like there's an act of prejudice happening right now, where I felt, or I'm experiencing some form, I guess, of racism?
I would say being a Black female in Henderson, I've experienced like a passive form of racism of me being one of the only Black people in my community. I've experienced people trying to be a certain way when I walk into the room, like trying to be hood or trying to let me know that they're into like hip hop or
Black culture as a whole.
yeah, Black culture, or like, oh, I'm from the hood, so I know what you're going through. Certain things like that, where I've experienced like a very aggressive form of passive racism. Never a direct, like, calling me out of my name or certain things like that, but I've seen it with having Black brothers, my family being Black. I've seen it, but more of a passive way for me.
Okay, so you would say it's been more passive, but not necessarily active, but around you in your social circles, even with your family circles, that's where you have seen probably the more, I wouldn't say the more hurtful, because that's a relative term, but that's been the more aggressive kind of racism that you have seen, that you've experienced.
Within my community?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And when I say my community, majority of the time it's my white friends are within the church. It's just trying to, I think they're trying to cater to me being one of the only Black people at the church. And so it's more of like offensive to me because I'm like, I don't want to stand out because of my race.
Yes.
But it's more apparent because they're doing that. So I feel like it's more of offensive.
Alexa, I made this comment to you yesterday, and you called it. I asked you because I thought you Caucasian were white, and you flat out told me I'm white passing, right? So for people that are watching, what is white passing? But what do you think are some of your experiences in watching some of the racial tensions over the course of these? Not this 2020, but really in the past, which is why we're still here.
White passing. So I'm actually Hispanic, 100%. I was born in Panama. My parents are both Hispanic. My mom married my stepdad, who's white, and he legally adopted us. And so we left when I was around 7 or 8. And so white passing just means that you can look at me and I have white privilege because of my skin color. You can look at me and say, okay, she could be white or whatever, or she might be mixed with something. So white passing is like the correct term for someone who isn't white, because I'm not, but I'm also, I could pass as that, so white passing. I have not personally experienced racism myself, but I have seen a lot of it with my friends being from the South, and because after we moved to Panama, or from moving from Panama, we've been living in Tennessee for like most of my life. And so living there, and the friends that I have, I also went to college in Kentucky in a tiny, tiny town. And then also in the men that I've dated, I've seen probably the most racism in that. In the men that I've dated, and people just not approving of that, even my own family members, some people in my family. And you know, these men are people who have like led me to Jesus, like who have invited me to church, and just some of the most just amazing men I've ever met. And so that was always just so hard for me. And then one of my best friends that I met in college, this was probably the most blatant form of racism that I experienced with her. We were on a trip going to DC. We were just gonna go explore, like see all this history. And we were getting on a plane, and it was Southwest, so first come, first serve. We checked in super late. And so we were like the last ones to get on. And I found a seat, and so we had to sit separate because there just weren't any two seats together. And I went to the bathroom on the plane. Then when I was coming out, I noticed that she was about to get off the plane. And I went up to the front. I was like, what's happening? And she was like, oh, there's only this seat left, and they don't want me to sit next to them. And I did this hard turn like this because I was looking at who it was, and it was these two older white men. And I just in my mind, I was just like, no, like, no way. No way they would blatantly say that to you. And so I was like, I turned to them and I said, well, what's going on? And they told me the same thing, like, yeah, like, if you want to sit here, you can. And I said, I went off. And so I was just like, yeah, I don't want to sit next to you. How dare you? You are so disgusting. Like, it was not great. But no one on the plane was standing up, saying anything, helping me, none of the flight attendants, nothing. And so I was like, hey, let's just, I was like, here, you have my seat and we'll figure something else out. And when I got off the plane, this girl, I've known her for a while, and she's not somebody who would take any crap from anyone. So I got off the plane and I was like, why did you just let them talk to you like that? And she said to me a statement that I'll never forget, and it made so much sense. And she said, if I would have made a scene, I would have been kicked off the plane, not them. She said, I don't have room to mess up. Like, y'all do, I don't. And she said the whole trip would have been ruined if I would have acted the way I wanted to act. And I was like, yeah, that makes so much sense, and it made me so sad.
That is so real, and I think that's one of the issues, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but that's one of the issues, just in a way there's a privilege that you saw, and you witnessed it firsthand, and they told you flat out, you consider she can't, and that's where we're at. My stereotypes come from somewhere, but I would ask you guys, like, where do you think, how you perceive this is white, this is black, this is Hispanic, where does that come from? Where do you seeing that the messaging is in your face?
I think just things that have been fed to us, things that just our generation's parents have, a part of you, like, it's like, okay, this is how they grew up, that's all they knew, right? You can excuse racism a little bit, but when it becomes inexcusable is when they refuse to change,
yep,
or refuse to accept a new way of thinking, or just have these conversations or anything like that. And so I was never really having these conversations with anyone until I started in like high school, or even with like the first person I dated who was black, or stuff like that. And then I was opened up to this like whole like new world. And so I think it just comes from like what you're being fed, like exactly like things in the media. And I say this like really carefully, but just and what Gail said, it's just so deep, the history of it. Just going back like 400 years, like when slaves were first coming here, and just like, I'm currently reading this book, like The Color of Compromise, and I've read The Myth of Equality and things like that. And it just talks about how like from so long ago, people of color, and especially black people, have been set up to just not succeed and to fail. And so that's been, in our government, that's been in the laws that have been written, and that's been, founding fathers. I mean, dating way back, and just in the systems that we are currently in now. It's maybe not as like blatant as it used to be, but now it's very subtle, which is almost a little more dangerous.
Yes, 100%.
So it's a little subtle, and just like the subliminal messaging that happens in the little conversations and things like that, or the things that are subtly seen, or just the way that people are portrayed.
Yep.
I've been, now everything since, in May with, we've seen this huge uproar with what happened with George Floyd, and just like all these protests. We are now starting to see like different organizations or different churches, or just being so much more outspoken about it, and being like, okay, we do need maybe some black leadership in running some of this organization. We do need these things, and that is great. We love that. We love seeing change, but this should not be happening in 2020. It just shouldn't.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off that, we were talking beforehand a couple hours back, but I think the idea of seeing people of color, black people in positions of power, as well as in positions of leadership, it goes a long way. Like it makes a big difference. And in light of what you're saying, now a young black man or a young black woman now sees what could be, and that becomes the object. That's the object of my eye, versus here's what you're supposed to do. Here's what it's supposed to look like in this sort of setting, this kind of job. So, Al, we'll keep going.
I totally agree with what you're saying.
It's on, I think. It's on. Okay.
I just want to say I totally agree. This past weekend, the message was the separation of church and hate. And the pastors, it wasn't Shane, it was, who was the speaker?
Nate.
Nate.
Yep.
He said that one of the things that stood out is that basically the church has to lead the way, I believe, when it comes to issues of race, because there are platforms out there, there's ideologies, there's belief systems, there's prejudice. Oh, okay, we all know that's out there, but the church has to take the lead and communicate to its members to say, hey, even though you may come from that side, or you may have grown up, or this may have been passed on, we are called to love. We are called to unity. We are called to be one. And just a quick verse, it says, if my people are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And the reason, just bring that scripture up, because I just believe sometimes those, I guess, there's things, I guess just growing up in the church even, that I believe that have been pushed aside, if you will. And just speaking just personally, had a close friend one time, and he said that his parents were, of a certain belief about, black people and so forth. And he told me that he couldn't, basically said, I couldn't congregate with you while they're in town. He was like, I love you. We've hung out. We've shared meals together. But when his parents were in town, he was like, we go to the same church. And he was like, but I can't do it because my parents are just blatant, racist. And it broke my heart, and I was like, wow, But I understood where he was coming from at the same time. He didn't want to disappoint his parents. But at the same time, I knew that it was something that was, it just wasn't right. And so I just know in that instance, a lot of times it has to start with God's people, and we have to be the shining light, and we have to show His love to one another.
Well said, man. Well said. I want to wrap up, but I want to ask Gail and Shaniqua, you two specifically. So, from a white perspective and a black perspective, what would you say? I know, smile. What would you say is like, okay, as a white individual, these are things that can help, I think, not only me, but maybe even help other people that are part of the white culture to understand that this is an issue and here's what you can do. Shaniqua, same thing. I am a black woman. I have experienced this, but this is what you can do to help us really get this awareness out. So this is not just some trend that just disappears. Once this is all said and done, 2020 is over. There was a year of COVID, the year of social justice, and that was it. Like, we're moving forward, but it's just a constant. Like, we're taking a bit at a time, like a nice little crock pot analogy, man. We're gonna slow bake this thing, man. Slow cook this thing, but it's gonna happen. It's gonna come to fruition. So what would you say?
I think there's a part of it that is to be patient as we learn. I think from my experience, part of it was to acknowledge that maybe I didn't understand what I thought, and I think just to ask the questions and enter those uncomfortable conversations and to hear the stories, because your story is different from your story, is different from your story, is different from your story, is different from my, and that's how it would be. So I think it's to ask those questions, but to just recognize that may or may not play a big part of that person's life, but to be willing to just talk about that and not ignore it like something that hasn't happened or couldn't have happened or whatever. And so I think for me, that was just recognizing that, man, this is a part of everyone that I've asked story in a very different way for each person. So for me, it was just being willing to recognize that I still had things to learn in that discussion. And I think the other part is, like I said, to be patient with one another and enter in the education of it. And then exactly what Al said is we need to lead the way and just love one another. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It sounds so easy, but it's just not.
It's really hard, yes.
Yeah.
Especially coming, yes.
Yeah.
I can go on, but it's okay. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say, one, I don't want to sound rude, but we don't need a white savior right now. I think we need someone who will stand next to us, side of us, just to like fight against what's going on right now. We don't need someone to like lead the charge. We need them to be with us and standing with us.
So good.
I've seen so many people just want to like gun ho and post on Instagram and just like voice their opinion without putting action behind it. So I would say if you're
Yeah.
going to be vocal about the issue right now, to literally step outside of your door and put action behind the words that you're posting. Because if you're just posting without doing anything, it's basically feeding your ego. In my own eyes, is just putting the spotlight on you and not the issue. I think the other thing is just to acknowledge that there is an issue. I think people are trying to choose one side or the other. And all you have to do with the starting point is just acknowledge that there's been an issue and there's currently one right now. And we've just been building onto it and covering it up with just other issues. But let's just get to the root of it and the problem without trying to cover it up with something else that's going to be a trend, you know? So just acknowledging the problem, putting action behind your words that you're posting, and also just loving one another. Like you said, being patient with each other. We're all learning. As a Black female, I'm still learning just my history and how I can stand up and fight against what's going on. But just learning together, I think, is the biggest thing that we could do right now. And that, yeah, just being honest and open and having the conversation. We shouldn't tiptoe around the issue and not talk about it. I think that's what we should do, you know?